Okay, we are recording and we are here. I'm with Emily Nemens. I'm Anika Orrock. We are both authors who came out with books this spring. Emily came out with her debut novel, The Cactus League, and I've been enjoying it immensely. Thank you. And I wrote and illustrated The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League.
It's just so much fun.
I've lent out your hard copy already. So I have the trifecta of Cactus League. I had the hard copy, the ebook copy, and the audiobook because my life has been so crazy and I wanted to get as much of it in as I could.
Oh yeah.
So like when I wasn't with the hard copy, I had my iPad and I was working on that. So I'd do that. And then I would go for tons of walks because it's all we can do here. So I'd be listening.
Yeah.
And it was great because I never like had to pick up anywhere. It was like I knew where I was in the story.
There's so many actors on the audiobook. I was really excited. They let me pick the voices. I should say the Cactus League is like an ensemble novel. So it's about this community, this team in spring training, but you know, there's the star of the team and the book is definitely oriented around him, but it goes out in concentric circles. And so I got this sort of playlist with like 18 names on it. And my publisher was like, you have the weekend. And I said, what are you talking about? And I got to pick 9. So for each chapter and each different situation, different focus, the actor changes. And I was thrilled. I mean, it was a big investment in terms of the publisher and a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, I'll bet. Do you have, this is really crappy of me, but do you have your hard copy of your book nearby?
Yeah.
Can you show it also since I lent mine out? Okay. Well, thank you. Because I want people to see it and know that they can get the books. Well, Emily and I know one another because I knew about you and your book beforehand, but I was listening to Marty Laurie's show on KMBR and he had you on as a guest and I was scheduled to be a guest, I think the next day. And I was so excited because I hadn't had a chance to start reading Cactus League yet. So I really enjoyed listening to your interview with Marty. And then Jason Turbo and Brad Belukjian and Eric, oh my God, Nussbaum. I can't remember all these names. And we sort of were formulating this idea and came together to try to formulate some kind of like a club for all of us authors with baseball books who had suddenly, like all of our events were canceled and our launches effectively done.
Right. I mean, it's usually such a good idea to have a baseball book come out in the spring. People are so excited about the new season and this is the time to do it. You know, the actual, you know, spring training games and or April games don't actually matter that much in terms of, you know, the long season. So people are excited about baseball, but have some time to read. Little did we know that all people would have right now is baseball books.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things that, well, you can look at it any which way, but we could have just been like, well, there goes that, like, you know, but we all I'm glad you got
to have your launch party though.
Thank you. I am too. And it was really, really a good one. I feel like if I only got one event, I'm glad it was that one. It was great. But yeah, I think we've all sort of decided, well, there's nothing we can really do about this. So let's just kind of band together and make the most of it and have fun with it. So that's kind of how we got to meet, which is fun. And here we are. So we're going to ask each other a few questions about each other's books. And we've both done, I think, quite a few. You've definitely done more interviews than I've done, but a lot of the interviews are, I don't want to say formal, but there's definitely a standard formula. So I think it's more fun for authors to interview authors. Maybe not more fun, but it's different.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. When did you start working on The Incredible Women?
Well, I started working with and illustrating stories inspired by some of these women quite a while ago, but before the book idea really ever came about. But I really started working on it pretty much after I signed the contract with Chronicle. I had done some research, but not as much as I was going to, because my original pitch and the original premise for the book in my mind was just going to be like a story paired with an illustration on each spread, a story provided by a player, and then an illustration story by a player illustration. And the first meeting I had with the editor that I worked with said, we want to do it, but not enough people know that this happened. And there's like a whole generation that never saw the movie, and the movie is largely fictionalized. So we want you to do it, but we want you to do like the whole shebang.
Right,
so,
like starting with the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
And like go through the whole history and really dig in, which was very exciting. It was an entirely different project, which meant I really had to do research. And so that started in 2017. I started the research, and then I started writing in almost exactly a year ago, like 2018. No, I'm sorry, late 2018. And then illustrating, I had like 3 months to complete all the illustrations, which was just insanity. I look back sometimes at like the timeline I had and what I did, and I feel like I was possessed. I don't feel like it came out of me. I'm like, how did that even, because I am not a fast worker. I'll spend way too long on something really simple. So I don't know how I did that, but
Oh, you did it. This is your first book, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Yeah, feels good.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to ask you, okay, well, like I said, before I knew anything about you, I saw your book at the Strand. I was in New York City, actually for a Society of Illustrators thing. And one of the things that really struck me when I learned about you, when I looked into who you are, this is before we met, I just had the book and I wanted to learn more about the author. And of course, I learned that you're the editor of the Paris Review, which I've followed for a long time. And it's the most notable, largest
one of those
literary quarterly. Oh, nice. Yeah. Okay.
This is the current one, but go ahead.
No, that's great. And so I learned that aspect of, that's what you're doing. And I was very excited about that. But the other thing that really got me excited or intrigued was, the first things I noticed, the reason I picked up the book was that it was a baseball novel, a fiction novel, and that it was written by a woman. So those things already I was excited about and felt like they were relatable to me and my interests. But then I learned that you're also an illustrator and a cartoonist. So immediately I was like, okay, there's a lot of things that I relate to in this woman. And I, whether or not we would actually ever get along, I feel like I could have a lot to talk about with this person, and it made me more excited to read the book. So what I wanted to ask you about is that, there's kind of an easier parallel to draw between art and visual art and writing. And the Paris Review is even a good example of that. They've always sort of done things to establish that connection through the prints and the covers and the poster series and all that. But there's a less obvious parallel between art and baseball. And you managed to sort of thread that through your novel in various ways, through the physical connections like ballet, and you bring in Frank Lloyd Wright and the architecture and sort of the weaving of all these different aspects of art. I know you got a double degree in art, but can you talk a little bit about that, like your connections and how you were able to sort of, what your intention was in weaving those three things together in a world, a sporting world that isn't really known for its visual art connection?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually related to one of my questions here for you. So
okay.
I'll follow up with that. I'm such a magpie with my interests. I mean, I studied art history studio art in school, and my first jobs were all editing for arts organizations and architecture organizations. So I had this vocabulary to talk about art and talk about visuals, talk about buildings, thinking about structures in a way that I really loved that language. I loved having those conversations, having the challenge of expressing something that I'm so excited about, which is the visual world, finding language to make meaning for that enthusiasm and help people understand why it's important and why it matters. But where's the plot? Where's the narrative? Where's the character development in that? And as a fiction writer and someone who all through her 20s, all through undergraduate studying art history, thought I'm going to write a novel someday. At a certain point, at the end of my 20s, I had been editing and thinking about language around art and architecture and drawing and writing a little bit. I just wanted to sort of invert that pyramid and write literature and write fiction and really commit to writing full time. So I went to graduate school. I left New York City, started a grad program in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and started teaching myself really diligently how to write fiction. As someone who's always been a book nerd, as indicated by my background, as someone who's always read a lot and thought about language and, wanted to have a life in letters, I was doing a lot of other things. I was double majoring in something else and living in New York and, working with architects. And I loved all of that, but I just really needed to change my equation. And so, of course, then when I started writing, it had all of that visual language in it. And I just loved the descriptions, and maybe coming up with, they feel natural to me, but they might not be your standard way of describing movement on the field or the details of the stadium, what your sort of standard sports writer might describe when he's looking at a stadium. Because I spent 3 years trying to write for architecture and making architects more cogent and appealing to sort of the general public. I have a different set of details and descriptors sort of in my back pocket. So a lot of the language of building out that visual world came from, an affinity and an enthusiasm for thinking about how the world looks and how it fits together and what those details, sort of the sensory enjoyment of them, but also what they might say about us. And I think that's the other way that as a visual artist, and cartoons do this too. It's social commentary, right? And I think studying art history, one of the things that I really took away from looking at, everything from the Impressionism up through like the Spanish Civil War and even a lot of 20th century American movement, is the art says a lot about the culture at that time. So you can describe a place and say, or describe a painting and, it's a woman who's holding a child to her chest, and the painting's in black and white, and she's, sort of ascending out of this window, heading, I think she was facing to the right side of the canvas. And, you can describe all of it, but what does it mean that Picasso painted this massive black and white painting of carnage in Guernica, And so I think that kind of exploration of describing something, maybe realistically, maybe a bit not flatly, but objectively, and then bringing meaning out of it, whether it's illuminating a character or some sort of social commentary about the community of professional sports in 2011, which is when my book is set. It feels funny to say I learned that as an art historian, but I do think that skill set of like analyzing an individual example of a place and time and sort of extrapolating or imagining what that means and says about the contemporary society is something that I learned in art history seminars.
Yeah. I love though that there's, because like you're saying, there it is indicative of culture, but there's it's like they're all intertwined. The politics that are happening is reflected through the art, is reflected through the photography, through the film, through the like all different aspects of society and what's going on. And I think it's really interesting that you sort of like, because sports is also like a really big identifier for culture, particularly in America. So to sort of like put them all together in this, I don't know, whatever this is.
Right. Well, I mean,
it's really interesting.
As a writer, and I think as an illustrator too, like I kind of feel like, you know, you have the capacity to sort of hold up a hand mirror and show it, you know, a very small view, but one that feels that can be very relevant and feels indicative of a larger story and a larger picture. I mean, talk about moment in time, The Incredible Women. So it started in 43, is that right? Was that the first season?
Yeah. 1943.
And, I mean, looking at the illustrations, looking at the style of the drawing, it feels exactly right for mid-century. How did you land on, you know, this aesthetic that felt? How did you build out that aesthetic for the book?
Well, I will say that I think that aesthetic and me existed before the book, which is,
Okay.
I'm guessing when I look back on it that it's really just how the book was able to happen. My personal passions and inspirations for my own works, because a lot of what I had been doing previously for work was illustration for other people, other things, other industries, and also working in animation industry where you're having to develop visually somebody else's idea, somebody else's story, somebody else's aesthetic. So I just really kind of got worn out of that and really started to feel the thing that I think happens to a lot of people who work in those industries where they realize, you know, they get to be 40 years old and realize they've been creating art their entire life, but they don't know what their own style or their own voice is. And I could feel that starting to happen. And I just felt so strongly about the things that I love and the stories I love to tell. And I had so many stories that I wanted to tell visually that I kind of did like the dumb thing and sort of just like abandoned all of it and cast myself out into like Sandra Bullock gravity space with with having any kind of anchor in that, but and started doing baseball stuff. Yeah, I guess so. But I started developing some of my own stories, and because I love baseball so much, I figured if I'm going to work on something and develop it for a while, it should be based around something that I love and that I have knowledge of, because, you know, sincerity is sort of the key to any of that. So I started developing some baseball stuff, and through that started finding the style that I think was in me, which I think one of my biggest influences artistically is my own grandfather. And I didn't realize it at all, actually, until I had gotten some things from my grandparents' house. We were moving my grandma somewhere, and in these things there was a stack of, he always made us birthday cards and Christmas, you know, whatever, he hand drew these cards, and I pulled them out, and my first thought when I pulled them out was, I don't remember drawing these. And that was when I realized, like, wow, that is how closely I guess I was influenced by him. But my grandfather's cartooning and drawings and illustrations were very much things that you see from that era, like the era where he did a lot of cartooning. So mid-century stuff that was influenced by a lot of the advertisement illustrations and cartoons and things of that era. So I was naturally drawn to the things that kind of looked like that and felt like that. And they really lend themselves well to something like baseball, because they sort of share a golden age, I guess you could say. Right. So when I submitted a book of illustrations that I, like a self-published book that I had done to Chronicle with my pitch, maybe they saw that. I didn't really connect anything. I didn't connect the two, but it just seemed like a natural fit. And all of the visual research I did and the bajillions of Pinterest boards I had, I mean, it's like I had to stop myself from visual research, not just historical, because it was just so much fun. That's the stuff I love. Right. So, so it was pretty easy.
Yeah, I was going to say, so part of it was on Pinterest. I wanted to know more sort of about the ephemera and in the visual research that you did where you found things, was there like a particular treasure trove either online and or like somebody's attic where you just thought these are all the fonts I need, or I want everyone's hairdos to look like this, or where did you find those gems?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was like gluttony because I had so little time that I just was like, it's so hard because I just love that stuff so much. But yeah, a lot of stuff online, but also a lot of advertisement things, visiting a lot of the archives, like visiting at the University of Notre Dame. They have a big archive from the league, and a lot of the stuff in there, they had like magazine articles and scrapbooks and like programs. So there was a lot of great stuff in there, but I've always just been in love with the baseball design and art of Otis Shepard and his wife Dorothy, who did a lot of the advertisement art for Wrigley and the Cubs. And then just kind of branching out from there, there's so much great art on old baseball programs and like in magazines, publications. So I actually went on eBay and got like a ton of magazines from the 40s and 50s. The art in there, I mean, it was such a great age for advertising too, because photography really hadn't made its way into the advertising world. So, right. Everything from like the cartoon style to the fully beautifully like, Rockwellian photorealistic illustration is just there's something to that look. And then also, of course, you have like all the photos, not just of baseball, but of the women working in the factories during World War II. And I'm just like, I know they're going to work in factories, but I'm like, damn, I would love that outfit. Just like the cool workwear and like the scarf, their hair tied up in the scarf. And they've got these like huge riveting guns with these gorgeous red shiny nails. And it's just like, visually, and the colors just kill me.
Yeah. I mean, there was some fun drawings of them off the field where I was like, I like that outfit. I'd wear that.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Can I ask, what's your setup? Like, how are you drawing digitally, or did you draw, sketch on paper and then scan things in? What's your process like?
Well, my normal process would be usually sketching on paper, and then sometimes scanning, or, iPads are so great, I'll just usually hold it over a drawing and take a picture and kind of work with it that way if I don't have the luxury of using actual paint and ink, which I love. But for the purposes of this book, I just had to start digitally because I knew with the time constraints. And I quickly realized just how easy and fun that is. And I thought, I'm in trouble and since then I've gone a lot more digital. It's just so much nicer to just like, and manipulate, or back button, which is awful. And I've noticed sometimes when I'm drawing on paper, every once in a while, I'll do this and I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. It's like when my 2-year-old cousin tried to swipe a photo on the refrigerator, like an actual photograph, and she did this and we were like, oh no. That's kind of how I felt, but all digital. And I do have a Cintiq. I don't know if many people know what that is, but it's a computer monitor that has like a pen capability and really good pressure sensitivity for use in like Photoshop and stuff. But I actually did this whole book on my iPad.
Wow.
So yeah, I started working on the other screen, but it's different. There are key commands, and it just felt more clumsy, and I was trying to move relatively quickly, and the touch capability on the iPad is so easy. So
right. Well, I mean, in so much of it, you're stitching together individual stories and individual drawings and individuals to tell those bigger narratives. So I can, now that you describe that, I mean, it sounds slightly crazy, but I can also see how, you execute so many. I mean, there's plenty of spreads that are like this, right? Where it's different sketches, and you can do a spot and then file it.
Yeah. And also my iPad is like relatively the same size as the book if it's open. And I felt like that was an easier way to, I have a tendency to really love to get in there and noodle, and then like you zoom out and it's like, you can't even see what I just did. So I felt like it was important to keep it relatively the same size, but there's so many great capabilities now digitally to make things look more
but then you
analog.
Also through like these amazing spreads. Like this is them all on the bus at probably 2 a.m. I love that.
Well,
I loved
thanks.
it. Yeah.
It was really, really fun. I mean, it was a lot of work and I spent a lot of time alone and I missed a lot of really cool things like my brother's wedding.
Oh no.
But yeah. But to be fair, he got married in Tahoe and it takes a long time to get there. What's funny is the whole point was that if I had been late, it risked pushing the publishing date to next spring. And I was like, no, it has to be published this spring. And sometimes I'm like, is this karma biting me in the ass? I don't know. Okay, so I have a question for you about writing a novel in the world of baseball. So I feel like a sports novel in general, not a sports novel, but in that world, is like it's like the unicorn of historical fiction because there are fewer of them, but you still have to do kind of the same things where you have to straddle these worlds. You have to exist in two worlds that have to be equally convincing. So like you're having to create characters and a narrative in the format of literature that is accomplishing what you want it to as far as the narrative and the purpose and what you're trying to obtain in that way. But then you also have to satisfy the reader of, anyone with sports knowledge. You have to be convincing and exist in that world too, because if someone gets a whiff of anything phony in either, you may run the risk of being discredited altogether, so you have to coexist. So I'm really eager to know, because clearly you have the experience, and if anyone does any research on you, they know that, okay, she's got literary chops, obviously, and you grew up a Mariners fan and you grew up a baseball fan, but as far as, we're in this baseball club group with like some legit baseball writers,
Yeah.
I feel like they're
national correspondent.
They're like at the cool kids table and I'm like over here in band camp, but anyway, that's that's just their job. So they operate in that world all the time. I'm really curious about your research in that world, because you don't approach it from a fan's perspective. You approach it from a very inside perspective, and not just inside the athletics, but inside the business and the ups and downs and the ascent and the decline and the deterioration and the, all these things that are very intricate in that world. How did you learn that? And how did you make it convincing to someone in that world?
Practice. No, what happened, I consider myself a fiction writer first. So my first draft was really trying to get, my first through 10th draft, let's be honest, was trying to get these stories right and understand these characters and their motivations and how they operate as a unit, and by unit, it's, the Los Angeles Lions, but then also this community of Scottsdale. A million people show up for spring training. It's like the carnival coming to town. So on a certain level, the Cactus League, my book, is, the story of the carnival coming to town and what it does to that town. And some of the people, are part of the traveling troupe. Some of the people are locals, but can't wait for them to show up and want to see the Lions, right? But so I had a sense sort of broadly and from my fandom of how to write about sports. But after I got a sense of the emotional and narrative heft of all of it, I went back through my draft thinking about baseball and thinking about the culture and the community, and I feel like every 2 pages I'd get to something and be like, whoa, I don't know enough about this. And then I would just go do a deep dive. Like the first chapter is with a batting coach named Mikey, who's been with the Lions for 40 years. And, he got called up on the expanded roster once in the 70s and then, got sent back down to AAA and spent the rest of his career there. And so I needed to like do a lot of research about just the intricacies of, you know, major league minimums in the 70s and, you know, eligibility across seasons historically and you know, minor league minimums and all of the sort of, there was a lot of math for about 3 sentences in the book. And I feel like I came up against those hurdles, like I said, every few pages. I think I was a big enough fan to recognize what my blind spots would be, what I didn't know. You know, I read one article about Tommy John that made some reference to 85% success rate, and that was at least the number in like 2012 or 2013 when I started working on that chapter. And so then I did just a ton of medical research about Tommy John surgery. Wow. And again, you know, there's a few descriptions of the scar, and I'm sure the technology has even changed since, you know, in the last decade for that surgery. But I needed to know all of that. That pitcher is competing against the guy who came up from the DR. And obviously I'm not an expert on the, it's not quite a draft, but, you know, the recruiting process to bring Dominican athletes up to the States and into the major league system. But I wanted to understand his backstory and speak about it cogently enough that I would get it right. So it was a lot of research that way, and it was so much fun. You know, I could have gone on forever, but I think, you know, it's a hard balance to strike to make it, you know, factual enough and right enough that I don't piss off baseball people, you know, and people who work, the other guys in the pandemic baseball book club, but, you know, also people that are just, you know, careful readers and like literary fiction but know baseball very well. I didn't want to upset or alienate any of them, but I didn't want it to be so jargony that it would alienate someone who you know, read a good review in the New York Times and thought, oh, here's a debut author that I want to get to know and want to know what she's doing. My agent saw an early draft of this book in 2015 and read it overnight, called me the next day and was like, I don't know what a leadoff is, but I love your book. So at that point, I was like, okay, that's all signs pointing to I've got that, you know, community of literary people who might feel a little bit intimidated by sports but are willing to give it a shot. I'm doing that okay. And then at the other end, right before we went to press, Sandy Alderson, a friend of a friend, introduced me, and he read an early copy. And he and I had a couple phone calls, and he like pointed out stuff that I got wrong, which fortunately, I mean, one of them was like a typo. One of them was something that I should have known, but I didn't. One of them, I knew I was stretching plausibility, but I wanted to keep it for dramatic effect. And yeah, so I was thinking about how to get the baseball right, both, you know, factually correct, but also the right levels the whole way through.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, it's interesting because I think, I mean, it is a difficult balance to strike, but I think the important thing is allowing people to sort of also exist with you in both worlds. And I commend I mean, you're obviously a fan, but I feel like to venture into any world in sports, I feel like baseball people are just like, man, they're like intense with their knowledge and the numbers and the like. And I think it's also difficult and different being a woman. I don't know about you, how many times this has happened to you, but it's a pretty common thing that happens to women who are fans of baseball, where you find yourself randomly being quizzed by men, like to make sure you know, like if I'm wearing like a Giants shirt, I've had guys come up to me and just kind of start prodding and testing, and it's such a weird thing, but I think it's just also the nature of baseball people. And so I think it's really
this is the one good thing about being a Mariners fan is someone sees me in my Mariners gear and they just say, oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
The best ballpark hot dog I ever had was at Safeco. The cream cheese, it was like a Seattle thing, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
Safeco's a great place. Have you been doing that first, last, best, worst thing? Did you see that going around on opening day?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Your first stadium, your last stadium, your best stadium, and your worst stadium. I would
Oh.
love to hear yours, if not to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. And that's funny because I had like a little kind of like a game, like your five things that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with our book, but I'm like, I'll see. She may not be game. So that's perfect. That's good. Are you asking me now? Do you want to do it now? First,
We can do it in a minute.
last.
I
I just had to think for a minute. Okay, well, okay, so we could do, we'll put a pin in those fun things because that's a fun way to end. But I have one more question for you. Do you have any more questions for me about like book related questions?
Yeah, I have one more. Yeah.
Go for it. Or wait, did I ask you last or did you ask me last? I think it's your turn.
I can ask you. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the visual research, and you mentioned going to Notre Dame. It looks like from the end notes, you were able to interview some women as well.
Yeah, a lot of women.
I would love to hear about like going to meet these athletes and maybe like one favorite from your conversations.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Let's see. Well, they have an annual reunion still. Unfortunately, this year's was canceled, for obvious reasons. But so the ones that are still physically able to make it still travel. They're in a different city every year. So the first year I went to Cincinnati, I didn't know anybody, like nobody. And I someone called me on it in a different interview. The interviewer said, so it's kind of like crashing a family reunion. I said, that's exactly what it felt like. Cause it's like such an intimate, these people have been seeing each other. The women, and then also sort of like the association that's gathered around them, have been meeting since the early 80s. And, and then like after the movie came out, they sort of got a whole new following, and these new women sort of have stayed with them and been supportive of them since 92. And then here I came, and it was, I felt really out of place, but they were so sweet and cool and willing to talk. And then I interviewed several over the phone. Let's see, I must have interviewed all in all about a little over a dozen, I think like 14 women. But I have a few favorite interviews, but I think my favorite was when I was able to interview two women at the same time who have stayed really close friends over the years. And they're like the kind of friends that sort of finish each other's sentences, and they were on a team together. And I met them in the hotel bar, the first reunion I went to. And I just set my phone down with the voice recorder on, and I didn't really even ask too many questions because I really only had to sort of like nudge the ball, so to speak, and they just would start going. And they had just this is when I was like, okay, this is going to be harder than I thought, not to get material, but like I could just illustrate and do an entire book of this evening. The stories were amazing. But one of my favorite stories that one of them told me was that she had left after the league had folded. She went to school and then went on to become a nun. And she was in a convent. And one day in the convent, she was tasked with driving Mother Superior into downtown Chicago to meet with the local Archbishop of Chicago for a meeting that was going to be televised. And this is like in the 60s, like the early 60s. So she drives Mother Superior into Chicago. And what's great is while she's telling it, the other one is like totally giving her shit and like, well, they would never let you in anyway. And, like she's just like razzing her the whole time, and they're just giving each other shit the whole time. And it was just comical. But anyway, she she dropped Mother Superior off and then went back to her old school to pay a visit. And a bunch of kids, knowing that she was a Cincinnati Reds fan, said, you got to take us to Wrigley. We got to go to the game because the Reds are playing the Cubs. And she's like, well, I can't do that, but I'll drop you off. I'll drive you there, but I can't go. She's in her habit, whatever. And
yeah.
She pulls up, and this is like back in the day when there are actually people working these kinds of things. There's sort of like a valet type as you pull up to Wrigley, and she pulls up to drop them off. And what he sees is a nun in a huge car with a bunch of kids at a ball game. So he says, you can park right over here. And she said, well, I'm just, no, it's okay. I'm dropping him off. And he says, no, take the vice president's parking spot. He's not here today. Please. Like, I insist. She said, well, I'm not going to the game. I can't go to the game. And he's like, well, of course you can. She said, I don't have money. I don't, and he said, well, why don't you take the vice president's box seats? Because he's not here today. So you can take the kids. So she said, I couldn't turn that down. So she went, and she said the Cubs were beating the Reds the whole game. It was just like a sad sight. And she said, but then all of a sudden in the late innings, the Reds, they pull up their socks and they pull one out, whatever. She says they start rallying and they get a run in, and then they get men on, and then they come from behind and they knock one in to get the tying run. And she said, the second they got the tying run, I stood up and I was cheering. And then they knocked a guy in for the go-ahead run. And she's like, I don't know what came over me, but I just lost my mind. I was like screaming and hollering from the vice president's box and cheering for the Reds. And what happened basically was like every television camera, every whatever turned to just see this nun losing her mind. And now I guess it would be all over the internet. But at that point, it made its way over every news channel. And she made her way back, picked up Mother Superior, made her way back to the convent. But because Mother Superior's meeting with the Archbishop was meant to be televised, she, of course, tuned in to watch. And all she ended up seeing was Katie all over, like the nun who went to the baseball game. And needless to say, Katie was told that she should not consider taking her final vows. And she was essentially asked to leave the convent and never went on to become a nun. But she's like, well, anyway, here I am.
How funny.
Stories like that, I was just like, it's just gold. I mean, there are so many. It was really hard to whittle them out and stick to whatever would follow the flow of the narrative and not go too far off. But yeah, there's a lot of bonus material. What's that?
Book 2.
Yeah. We'll see what awaits that launch.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to ask you one more question that really intrigued me listening to and reading your book. So the story aspect, I mean, you said first and foremost you're a fiction writer, and so obviously that entails story. But for me, what inspires my work in this world of baseball are the stories. So I'm not, like you were just describing, I'm not a numbers person. I'm not a stats person. That isn't the part of baseball that interests me. And in the beginning of your book, you even begin by talking about how the nuance, you were talking about the box scores and that there's just the nuance of all of this existence in these people's lives and these stories doesn't exist on paper. And that line got me really excited. I was like, okay, this is where we're going to go. And this is the part in this world that I love, that I get excited about. But what's interesting to me is that most baseball novels that exist, most baseball fiction novels, the ones that we know about anyway, the most recent one I think I read was The Art of Fielding, that had anything to do with baseball, Chad Harbaugh. But before that, and even his included, you have Kinsella or Malamud with The Natural, things like that. And those books are all, I think, more centered around baseball, but they're also rooted in sort of the nostalgic, folkloric, heroic aspect of baseball. There's a whole lot of nostalgia there. And the Cactus League to me is not, it doesn't enter that it's not the nostalgic, wistful aspect of baseball. And you really develop these characters around these very complex emotional things that don't really enter into that world of nostalgia. In fact, like a lot of them are almost anti-nostalgic in kind of gritty ways. But, you know, and you really highlight flaws, particularly in the female, well, to me in the female characters, coming from a
the guys have a lot of flaws
totally
too, yeah.
No, that's what I was gonna say, not particularly the females. I guess I noticed, what's interesting is maybe I noticed and maybe identified with or saw things in myself of the flaws that are highlighted in the women. So
yeah,
it's sort of a two-parter where like you are speaking from a variety of very diverse perspectives, and then B, I guess, coming from the more identifiable perspective of a woman, I'm curious how and what drove the development of the people that you create in this story, without really dipping your toes into sort of like the sappy nostalgia of baseball, but still maintaining that world.
Right. Well, I think it probably started when I started the project and like with the conceit of it. I mean, I loved Art of Fielding and was one of the first. I mean, I knew I wanted to write a baseball book and promptly read Art of Fielding and was reminded of, you know, so many baseball narratives rely on the final season or the final series, the end of the season, the bottom of the ninth, you know, Pasco at the wall, the shot heard around the world. Like there's so many narratives that are structured around the close of the game and the box score and sort of the definitive answer of who won and lost and what that means for the characters at play. And I wanted to invert that. I wanted to write about, you know, games that don't count, the very beginning of things, you know, watching sort of the season open, what people are bringing into the stadium, in terms of previous seasons or what's happened to them over the off season and what they're trying to overcome. And I thought there was enough narrative there, and it would be an interesting, I mean, harder project, yes, but more surprising and more satisfying one to build narrative and conflict without relying on a 2-2 tie in the bottom of the ninth. And I mean, there is a countdown clock in spring training, right? Like there's 80 players and then there's 60 and then there, you know, there are cut days and there's a drama inherent in that. But I wanted to think about the unexpected. And I think then in terms of developing characters, I did a similar sort of thought exercise of thinking about so many archetypes of my favorite characters of baseball literature. And I say literature meaning novels, but also, you know, filmically and the characters that we've, you know, the Susan Sarandon, Baseball Annie, like that was a great part and she did a wonderful job, but can I make a more nuanced and complicated, empathetic and, you know, asshole of, you know, that Tammy is sort of my equivalent to that. And, you know, it wasn't ever one-to-one, but thinking about how, you know, gender has been represented in the sport, can I make that more complicated? You know, I think there's a physical trainer character, and you know, there's sort of the glossy, the team doc that, you know, it gets all the credit for keeping these athletes healthy and everyone else, but you know what? It's probably a 25-year-old woman who's actually like getting Charlie Horse out, right? Or like so much of the labor of baseball and thinking about not just the people who are getting the credit. This is a bit of a tangent. So, but thinking about sort of the hierarchy of it. So yes, it is about the team doc, but it's also about his assistants and what are their lives like. And, you know, it is about the star outfielder, but you know, when he starts having a bad season, how does that ripple out? And, but in terms of that character development, you know, thinking about agents, you know, I think we have this idea and expectation of the Scott Boras type but like, how can I make sort of the mega agent a more complicated persona and a more empathetic and sort of ruthless person by giving him, you know, a real backstory and a slightly bleak future. And in terms of building out the whole cast of characters, the whole team, you know, I wanted to assemble a group that had a lot of dimensionality, you know, thinking that someone over here is representing one aspect of the culture of baseball in our contemporary moment. Over here, this is representing something else. So, you know, there's it's a little bit upstairs, downstairs, trying to weigh, like, you know, the millionaires that own the club and or the all-stars of the team versus the concession workers. And not that it was like a one-to-one parody, but understanding that if I'm going to talk about this aspect of the game, I want to have the counterpoint of what does that side of the equation look like, and but not only have them be sort of column A and column B or complementary that way, but find enough resonances that there are themes of the book as opposed to just sort of a scatter shot. So, you know, with both the batting coach and Tamara, the cleat chaser, like they're both sort of aging out of their prime, and maybe they should hang up the spikes, as it were, but, you know, they're not quite ready to let it go. And so what do two different perspectives on that look like? What does that say about sort of the whole group of people who are gathering? You know, there's also an 18-year-old that decided to skip college, and he's really struggling. What does it mean for him to be a young athlete trying to make it versus, you know, this other athlete who's also 19 and probably will make it, but he feels totally alienated because of language barrier. So trying to make sort of pairs that speak to one another while also having sort of a pretty wide net of experience. It was hard. I mean, it wasn't, it's not like I just sort of plunked them all down. I had a much bigger cast of characters, and at a certain point, with the help of my editor and other gentle readers along the way, was able to sort of push people aside or minimize and crescendo different aspects so that it felt like the most, you know, resonant set of players.
And did you, I mean, once you sort of had the blueprint mapped out of what you wanted these things to mean and how you wanted them to play off of each other, did you reference people that had maybe had these experiences or talk to anybody to sort of develop that voice, or were you just sort of doing the kind of the acting part of fiction where you sort of embody, you know, place yourself in the character?
Well, I grew up doing a lot of oral history in college and in my 20s. So you know, the Writers at Work series at the Parish Review also is just such a lesson and practice of listening and embodying someone else's voice in, you know, a very selfless but focused way. So I think in that sense, I did feel equipped to be a bit of an actor, imagining what these different characters are like, because I spent so much time thinking about other people's narratives, how they tell their story, both what their story is, but also how they tell it. You know, I had, without realizing, I had done research in terms of building out an ensemble cast. I had been for all these years. I continue to be a little bit shy about interviewing in person, but I did look at a lot of oral histories. I read a lot of autobiography, I read a lot of journalism, did do some conversations. I think we talked about this on Twitter, but there is an organist in the book, and when I realized I was in the same room as Josh Canner, the organist for Fenway Park, I made a beeline, and I was like, "Excuse me, I'm writing about, you don't know me, but I'm writing a book about baseball, and there's an organist who, you know, grew up playing the traditional pipes for a baseball stadium, and can we just hang out for a little
so
while.
funny.
And he very politely said yes. And, you know, in that case, I'd already written the chapter, but was ready to revise as needed. And, you know, my imagination plus, you know, some jazz knowledge, some musical knowledge from playing jazz, got me pretty close to the mark. So I didn't have to do that much rewriting, but it was, yeah, being pretty, a certain amount of scrappy to get the research done.
That's great though. I love that for multiple reasons, but I think it was probably a great feeling to know like that you had written it, and then after your time spent with him, that had to be pretty validating for the remainder of the book to be like, okay, what I'm doing for this and where I'm going with it is like, it's like working kind of, you know, that you weren't, you know, that you weren't too far off, or there wasn't something that struck you where you're like, oh, I didn't know anything, you know, that you were able to piece that into a character. But also I just love that he like, I feel like in this little world, he has like become this weird Kevin Bacon because he has also appeared in completely non-baseball related, like he knows my lawyer and she has season tickets at Fenway, and she's like, I have to introduce you to Josh Cantor, which I had already been introduced to through like, I think it was someone on Instagram, but then a musician friend of ours who I know because his wife is the founder of a chain stitch embroidery company out of Austin called Fort Lonesome that does these like amazing nudie suit style for like music industry people. And that's her, like, it's completely unrelated, but it's like all these little things just keep coming back to Josh Cantor. We finally got to meet him this last season, but I just think that's so funny. And then I saw you guys come up together. I was like, really? That's, I mean, not terribly surprising, but also like, wow, do you also know my mom? And I just don't know it. Like, but that's great.
They're having tea right now.
Yeah, probably. That's probably why my phone keeps lighting up. You'll never believe who I'm Zooming right now. So I was thinking, when this whole thing is over, let's just like take ourselves to a place where we imagine that we can actually do something like a road trip to spring training. If you were on a road trip, I have 5 questions for you about if you were going to take a road trip right now to spring training in Arizona. I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your road trip. First of all, and if people have read the book, they'll know what I'm talking about. Are you going to drive a shitty Chevy convertible that won't convert, or a busted old Jeep?
Oh, the Jeep.
Okay. Good choice.
More room for my gear. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The Paris Review was founded in 1953. Which 1950s road trip book, written by authors who've appeared in the Paris Review, are you going to bring? On the Road by Jack Kerouac or Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie?
Oh, that's hard. Well, you know, my first big writing gig, like my first big break, was at the Kerouac house, where he wrote Dharma Bums in Orlando, Florida. Is now writing residency. So I had like one really good 10-page story at that point in my life, and the Kerouac folks were like, yeah, you have a great 10-page story, come write some more stuff in Jack's old house. So I think I have to say that, but I also love driving around with my dog. I mean, I love it. She like, it's her favorite thing. That and squirrel. So
how about this?
I think Jack, I guess.
Okay, well, we'll strike a compromise because, so one you can bring with you to read when you get to your hotels. The other one is an audiobook. Now, would you rather listen to the audiobook of, let's say, Travels with Charlie, or listen to the entire 1995 American League Division Series between the Mariners and the Yankees?
Oh, I gotta listen to that. I gotta. God, that team was so good. Yeah.
You want to go to the AL Division Series? Okay.
Yeah.
Good choice. Okay. You stop at a gas station, you get a snack. Pringles or Bugles?
Oh, I always get combos.
Oh. Throwing me for a curve. No pun intended. Okay. When you get to Scottsdale, okay, sadly it's closed now, but let's pretend it's not. Are you going to go have dinner at Dawn and Charlie's or the Biltmore Hotel?
Oh. Dawn and Charlie's.
Okay. Good choice.
I mean, the Biltmore is like way posher. Depends on who's paying, but no, still Don and Charlie.
Let's just say it's free no matter what, because this is already a fantasy, so we can just.
I mean, may it rest in
Beyonce
peace.
called; she's paying for it.
Yeah.
Okay, now since you didn't get to actually go to a spring training game, if you had a do-over and you could only go to one game, what would be the perfect matchup?
Wow. I think I'd want to see the Mariners play at Salt River Field. So I don't care who they'd be playing. What it's the Diamondbacks and the Rockies play there, I think.
Yeah. That's
anyway.
Oh wait, Salt River.
That's the same one. It's Salt River Field at Talking Stick.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
It's just a very long name. Because Peoria is like it's like a strip mall, but they're my team. So I'd like to be at the stadium that I wrote about, Salt River Field at Talking Stick, but watching my boys. So yeah, Colorado.
Good call. Okay. I don't know why I'm writing down the answers. I just realized I was writing down the answers. Like, am I saving these for something? I don't know. Well, whatever.
Posterity,
at least I have them.
Posterity.
Okay. Yeah. It's just my nature. Taking notes. Okay. Now, this last quick one is a thing that Brad came up with last night that I thought was very clever, because he said it's something that nobody's going to ask and nobody really cares about except authors. So from author to author, you get a chance to do this. The acknowledgments, like nobody reads the acknowledgments, but it's like our favorite, at least for me, it's one of my favorite parts. And it's actually why my publisher had to extend the page count of my book. It's because I had like 9 pages of acknowledgments.
Yeah.
But so he just picked a name, like a random name from my acknowledgments, and asked me to explain who they were and why they were in the acknowledgments. So I just went through your acknowledgments and I literally closed my eyes and put down my finger, and I landed on Gwen Fuertes.
Oh, Gwenny. She was my roommate my senior year of college. She's an architect. There's so much architecture in the book, living in the Bay Area. And she's just, a dear friend, a creative, brilliant mind. I would call her part of my girl gang, and has always just supported me and believed in me. And bonus point for Gwen, she lives in San Francisco. And she showed up. She was at a national meeting for the American Institute of Architects in DC. She surprised me by showing up at Politics and Prose. I was reading. I'm not good at distance when I'm doing book events. I'm reading and just sort of blink out. But I was like, there's a redhead the same size and build as Gwen Fuertes in the back of this room. And sure enough, she showed up across the country. So that's Gwen. Can I do it for you? This is so cool. Fun.
Sure. Isn't that fun? I was very impressed. I think that should be a part of all of our things now.
Let's see. Kate Munch.
Oh, Kate. Kate was my American Sign Language teacher. I took American Sign Language as my language all through junior high. Well, not junior high. That was German and that was terrible. High school and then college. She was my college ASL instructor, but she's also an incredible writer and just a support. She's just a light. I don't even know how to describe her, but she's perfect for sign language interpreting, because that also involves a lot of gesturing and facial expressions. And she was a great supporter and influence for writing and art. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, this was so much fun.
It was really fun. Thank you.
All right. Get Anika's book. It's awesome.
Get Emily's book. It's amazing.
Everyone stay safe. Thank you for staying home, and stay well. And let's hope for baseball soon.
Oh, amen. At least get through this year and enjoy the hell out of next year. But stay safe yourself over there.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, take care.
That was fun. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye.
This is great. To get it hand sculpted the hair. I mean, I have big hair, it's true, but it's in relation to my head, not to my body, so it goes way back.
I love it.
And Yeah, and it was for a pre-sale promotion, and then they asked me to bring it on tour and sort of document bobblehead Emily everywhere she went. And I did that. I did the first half of my tour. So I went up the West Coast with this,
good.
small, bobbly-headed, very fragile version of myself. And
Well, it's a better likeness than a lot of bobbleheads. And how many more tour dates? How much more tour did you have planned?
I was about halfway through. So
okay.
my day job is as an editor of a literary magazine here in New York. And so I had sort of planned it out. So I would go out and come back and go out and come back. So I could keep things afloat a little bit more back in New York City. And also just, it's bad for carbon footprint, but like just good for my mental health to, do laundry and, and all of that. So I had 7 events in 9 days on the West Coast, and had just gotten back. I was actually in Seattle maybe 72 hours before they started social distancing there. And
you were in Seattle.
Yeah, but then New York was still, Seattle was sort of the front of it in the States, and so I got back to New York and started canceling dates. I was supposed to go down to spring training, and I had tickets for the first game they canceled. And, I was meant to get on like the 6 a.m. out of LaGuardia to go to Phoenix. And it was like, I don't think I can get on that plane. I think they're going to cancel baseball between now and then. And they did. So.
Well, I guess it's good you had an inkling before you got on the plane, though, especially that distance. That's a long way to fly to only arrive and find out.
Yeah. Were you able to do any of your events?
I won just the book launch party here at Parnassus Books in Nashville. And then it's funny how this whole thing has been around, obviously, for a while, and we've known about it, but the way it escalated and the amount of information is like, we had this like book launch event and party, and then we had a party here at my house after, and then like 5 days later everything happened. And it was like I started thinking about it. I was like, oh my God, we don't have a huge house, and there were a lot of people in this house, and I was like, oh my God, did I just like
did you just like run around with bleach?
And people came in from out of town. I was like, did I just bring COVID into Tennessee? Like, it's gonna be my fault. And I went around, and my mom got like a cough. It was an allergy cough, thank God. But in the middle of it, she got a cough, and I was like, my mom's gonna get everybody sick. It was like a total afterthought, but thank God we made it through and nobody got sick. But the difference in those days of like everybody being okay with it, and then suddenly you can't do that, was like, so short. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it happened really fast. I know in New York, we actually yesterday we're the Paris Review is a nonprofit, and we were meant to have our big fundraiser on Tuesday night. And like a month ago, I was like, maybe it'll be better in a month. Maybe it'll be fine. And we canceled it anyway. But like 3 days later, de Blasio was like, no gatherings over 500 people. And then like 3 days after that, the subways were empty.